I still remember that evening like it happened yesterday, though my hands are wrinkled now, and my hair's turned the color of winter. It was the night I told my boy, my only son, to pack his bags and leave my house. I can still see his face, half angry, half scared, standing by the doorway with the porch light throwing a shadow across his cheek. He was 18, full of opinions and pride, thinking he knew the world better than I ever could. And maybe I was too proud to admit I was scared that I was losing him, scared that the little boy who used to follow me around the yard with a baseball glove was gone for good. We had been fighting for months by then. He'd stopped listening, stopped coming home on time, and when he did, it was only to slam the door to his room. I thought I was being a father by laying down rules, by demanding respect, but looking back, I realized I was just trying to control what I didn't understand. Times were changing, and I wasn't keeping up. That night he came home late again, smelling like smoke, maybe alcohol, maybe just rebellion. I yelled before I even asked. My voice was louder than it needed to be, and his eyes burned with something that frightened me. Pain. Real pain. He yelled back, said things that cut deeper than he knew, called me names, told me I was a failure, said he'd rather live anywhere than under my roof. My pride, my foolish, fragile pride, rose up like a wall between us. I remember shouting, "Then get out! You're 18 now! You think you're a man, go live like one!" And the moment I said it, I wanted to take it back. But I didn't. I stood there, my arms crossed, pretending I was strong, pretending I didn't care, while he stuffed his clothes into a backpack. He didn't even take everything, just a few shirts, his old jacket, and the keys to that beat-up truck I helped him buy. I watched him walk out into the night, and when the taillights disappeared down the road, something inside me went quiet. I told myself he'd come back the next day, that this was just another fight, but the house stayed silent. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and I waited for the sound of his truck, for the phone to ring, for a letter maybe, but nothing came. His mother had passed years before, and without him, the house felt colder than ever. I'd walk by his room sometimes and catch the faint smell of his cologne, the one I used to complain about, and it would make my chest ache. I filled my days with work, chores, anything to keep my mind busy, but every night when I sat in that old recliner, I'd see his face the way he looked when he was 5, mud on his cheeks, smiling at me, proud of the birdhouse we built together. I'd ask myself, over and over, where did I go wrong? But pride is a stubborn thing. It keeps a man from dialing a number he should have called years ago. It keeps a father from saying, "I'm sorry." So I didn't. I just waited. Seasons changed, birthdays passed, and the silence between us grew heavier, until it became part of my life, like the ticking of that old clock on the wall. I told people I didn't know where he was, told them I hoped he was doing well, but deep down I was afraid he'd forgotten me, or worse, that he hadn't. And so I lived with that quiet guilt, year after year, carrying the weight of that night like a stone in my chest, never realizing that one day, that same boy, now a man, would come back to my door, carrying a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and being a father. After he left, the days started to blend together in a quiet I wouldn't wish on anyone. Mornings came without purpose, and nights stretched long and heavy. I still went to work every day, same old hardware store in town, same worn counter, same customers asking about bolts and paint. But something inside me was different, hollow, like a piece of me had been ripped out. People would ask about my son from time to time, and I'd just say, "He's doing his own thing," pretending I was proud, pretending I wasn't dying a little every time I said it. The truth was, I had no idea where he was. I tried once, maybe a year after he left, to call one of his old friends, but when the boy said he hadn't heard from him either, I hung up and told myself I'd stop trying. Pride again, it's a cruel thing. It sits beside you when you're lonely, whispering that it's too late, that reaching out now would only make things worse. I'd sit at the dinner table alone, staring at his empty chair, remembering all the times he sat there talking about his dreams. College, traveling, making music, things I never understood back then. I used to tell him to be realistic, to get a real job, and now I'd give anything to hear him argue with me one more time. As years rolled by, I watched other fathers with their sons at the diner, laughing, sharing coffee, talking about football or life, and I'd smile politely, pretending I wasn't aching inside. Sometimes I'd drive past his old high school, just to feel close to where he used to be, and the memories would come flooding back. The time I taught him to drive, the time we fixed the porch together, how proud I was when he hit his first home run. Funny how those little things come back to haunt you when the house is empty. I kept his room just the way he left it. Dust gathered on the dresser. The posters started peeling, but I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. It was like my last connection to him, frozen in time. Years turned into decades, and the boy I once scolded had become a ghost in my memories. My body got weaker, my hands shook when I poured my morning coffee, and my reflection in the mirror became a stranger. I'd talk to myself sometimes, no shame in admitting it. I'd ask him questions like he could still hear me. "You doing all right out there, son?" Or "You ever think of your old man?" Sometimes I'd catch myself answering back, just to fill the silence. I thought about going to church more, hoping maybe God would give me a sign, but I didn't know how to pray for something I didn't believe I deserved. There were nights when I'd wake up from dreams where he was still little, running through the yard with that silly grin, and I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I let it all slip away. Regret is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you fast, it just sits inside, eating you from the heart out. I stopped celebrating holidays. Christmas used to be his favorite, but after he left, I couldn't bear the sight of a tree or the sound of carols. I'd just sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the snow fall, wondering if he was watching it too, somewhere far away. Time has a cruel way of dulling things, but not pain, not that kind. Every birthday that passed, I'd whisper a quiet, "Happy birthday," to an empty room. And every year, I told myself maybe next year I'd find him, maybe next year I'd make it right. But next year never came. Life just went on. I got older, the house got quieter, the world outside moved faster, and I stayed behind, a tired old man sitting in the same chair, waiting for something I wasn't sure would ever come. And then, just when I thought the world had forgotten me too, one rainy afternoon, there was a knock on my door that made my heart stop cold. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky looks tired and the air smells like old memories. I was sitting in my chair by the window, watching the drops race down the glass, when I heard it, 3 knocks, slow and heavy, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I almost didn't get up. My knees ache these days, and I don't get many visitors, so I thought maybe it was a delivery or a salesman. But something about that sound, it stirred something deep in my chest. I walked to the door, grumbling at myself for being so slow, and when I opened it, time just stopped. Standing there was a man I didn't recognize at first. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray, his face worn like he'd lived 100 lives, but his eyes, God, those eyes, I knew them instantly. My boy, my son. 20 years gone, and there he was, standing on my porch like time had folded in on itself. I didn't say a word, neither did he. We just stood there, the rain pouring behind him, and for a second I wondered if I was dreaming, if maybe this was another cruel trick of my old mind. But then he said softly, "Hey, Dad," and I swear, my heart almost broke right there. His voice had changed, deeper, steadier, but I could still hear the boy in it, the one who used to call me Dad, when he was scared of the dark. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I just stared at him, my hands trembling, feeling everything I'd buried for 2 decades rise up all at once. Guilt, love, shame, hope. He looked like he'd been through hell and back. His jacket was soaked, his face pale, and there was something tired in his eyes, like he'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. I finally managed to whisper, "Come in." Though my voice cracked like old wood, he hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, dripping rain on the floor. The house felt smaller suddenly, like it was holding its breath with me. He looked around slowly, taking it all in, the same furniture, the same faded pictures on the wall, his old baseball glove hanging by the door, where I'd left it all those years ago. "You kept that?" he asked quietly, a hint of disbelief in his tone. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. He gave a small smile, sad but real, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy he used to be flicker behind those wary eyes. I made him coffee. Though my hands were shaking so bad, I spilled half of it. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd once argued, laughed, shared meals, broken hearts. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't angry anymore. It was the kind that comes when two people have too much to say and don't know where to begin. Finally, he said, "It's been a long time," and I nodded, staring into my cup. "Yeah," I whispered. "Too long?" He looked at me for a while, his gaze soft but unreadable. Then he sighed and said, "I should have come sooner." I wanted to tell him I should have never let him go, that I'd spent 20 years wishing for this moment. But the words got stuck behind tears I hadn't let myself cry. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded photograph, and slid it across the table. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The photo was worn, edges creased, colors faded. But in it, I saw him standing with a woman and a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5. My breath caught. The boy in the picture had my eyes. "His name's Luke," my son said quietly. "He's your grandson." I stared at the photo, feeling my world tilt. A grandson. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to breathe. My son gave a small, sad smile. "That's not why I'm here," he added softly, "but I thought you should know." His voice cracked just slightly, enough to make my chest ache. I looked up at him, really looked at him this time, and realized he hadn't just come home. He'd come back with something heavy in his heart, something he wasn't ready to say yet. And for the first time in 20 years, I was afraid of what I might hear. We sat there in that kitchen for what felt like forever, 2 men who used to be family, now strangers bound by years of silence and a lifetime of things left unsaid. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper, tapping gently against the window, like the world itself was waiting for him to speak. My son. God, I still can't believe I get to call him that again. Sat with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on his coffee like it held the answers he came searching for. I didn't want to push, didn't want to scare him off, so I just waited. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. After a long stretch of quiet, he finally said, "I wasn't sure I should come." His voice trembled slightly, and that alone tore through me. "I almost turned the car around twice," he said, forcing a small laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But something told me I had to see you." I swallowed hard, afraid to breathe. "I'm glad you did," I said softly, the words feeling both too small and too late. He nodded, then looked up at me, really looked at me. "I used to hate you, Dad." The words hit me like a punch, but I didn't flinch. "I deserved that." He took a shaky breath. "For a long time, I thought you threw me out because you didn't love me. I told myself you cared more about being right than being my father." His eyes filled, and I felt my own begin to burn. And maybe I needed to believe that, because if I didn't, then I'd have to admit it was partly my fault too. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that I was the one who failed him. But something in me said to let him finish. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I did things I'm not proud of after I left. I was angry, lost, thought I could prove something. I drifted around, got in trouble, worked jobs that didn't mean anything." He paused, staring at his hands. "Then I met her, Mia. She was the first person who made me feel like I was worth something again." His voice softened when he said her name, and I could see the love still flickering in his eyes even after all these years. "We got married. We had Luke. Things were good for a while. Really good." He smiled faintly, but it faded as fast as it came. "But then she got sick." His voice cracked just slightly, and that was all it took for my heart to sink. "Cancer," he whispered. "It took everything we had. Money, time, hope. I tried to stay strong for Luke, but I was breaking inside." He stopped there, staring down at the table, his jaw trembling. I wanted to reach across, to put my hand over his, to tell him I was sorry for not being there when he needed a father most. But I didn't know if I had the right. "She passed last winter," he finally said, his voice small, fragile. "And after she was gone, I started thinking about you." He looked up again, and this time there were tears on his cheeks. "All those years I thought I didn't need you, but the truth is, I did. I needed my dad. I just didn't know how to say it." My own tears came then, uninvited, falling before I could stop them. For 20 years I'd imagined 100 ways we might meet again, but never like this. Not broken, not grieving, not carrying this kind of pain. "I'm sorry, son," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I was wrong. I was so damn wrong. I thought I was teaching you how to be strong, but all I did was push you away." He shook his head slowly, wiping at his face. "You were doing your best, Dad. I see that now. I wish we'd both figured it out sooner. The room went quiet again, except for the steady drip of rain outside. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel cold. It felt like healing. I reached across the table, laid my old, shaking hand on his. He didn't pull away. His grip was firm, warm, real. And in that moment, it felt like 20 years of pain started to melt, just a little. But even as I felt that small piece, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. A shadow, something he hadn't said yet. He looked at me, tried to smile, but couldn't hold it. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice trembling again. "There's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have said before I even came here." My stomach turned to stone. I could tell by the way he said it that whatever he was holding inside, it wasn't small. It wasn't easy. And as the rain began to fall harder again, I realized that the real reason he came back hadn't even begun to unfold. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the floor, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. I could see the fear in his eyes, not the kind that comes from weakness, but the kind that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. My chest tightened, and I could hear the rain hitting the roof harder now. Like even the heavens were waiting to hear what he had to say. "You don't have to tell me right now," I whispered, but he shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "No, Dad," he said, voice trembling. "I need to. I came here to tell you the truth." He took a breath so deep it sounded like it hurt. "When Mia got sick, I was drowning. I didn't know how to handle it. I was angry all the time, at God, at her doctors, at myself, and at you." His words cracked open something in me, but I stayed quiet. "After she died," he continued, "I fell apart. I didn't know how to be a father to Luke. I tried, but I couldn't hold it together. I lost my job, fell behind on bills, and one day I snapped." He looked up at me then, and the pain in his face made my heart ache. "I sent Luke to stay with Maya's sister for a while. I told him I just needed some time to get back on my feet, but the truth is, I couldn't even look at him without breaking." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He looks so much like her." He paused again, then said something I'll never forget. "I came here because I can't do this alone anymore, Dad. I don't want him to grow up without a father figure like I did. I want him to know where he comes from. I want him to know you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had spent 20 years imagining every possible reason he might come back, to forgive me, to ask for help, to say goodbye. But never this. He wasn't just asking for forgiveness. He was asking for family. He was asking me to be a grandfather to a little boy I'd never met, a boy who carried my eyes, my name, my blood. My throat burned as I tried to speak, but the words came out shaky. "Son," I whispered, "you don't ever have to do it alone again." His eyes met mine then, wet and wide, like he couldn't believe what he'd heard. "I mean it," I said, my voice firmer now. "Whatever you need. You and that boy, you come home. You both come home." He pressed his lips together, trying to hold back tears, but they came anyway. "I didn't know if you'd want that," he said. "After everything that happened." I shook my head, the guilt pressing down like a lifetime's weight. "I wanted nothing more," I told him. "I've just been too damn proud to say it." And in that moment, all those wasted years seemed to crumble between us. But then, as the silence settled again, I noticed something else in his eyes. Something still hidden, something he hadn't said yet. I could see it the way a father knows when his son's holding something back. He looked down again, twisting his wedding ring between his fingers, and his voice came softer this time, fragile as glass. "Dad, there's one more thing," he said quietly. "It's about me." My heart sank again, because I knew that tone. It was the same one I'd heard when he was a boy, and didn't know how to tell me he'd done something wrong. I leaned forward, my hands trembling. "What is it, son?" He hesitated, staring into his coffee like it could protect him from what he was about to say. "I didn't just come back because of Luke," he whispered. "I came back because I'm sick, too." The world seemed to stop spinning. I felt everything inside me go still, my breath, my heartbeat, even time itself. "What do you mean, sick?" I managed to ask, though my voice barely made a sound. He looked up then, tears streaming freely now. "They found something a few months ago," he said softly. "The same kind of cancer Mia had. It's advanced." My hands started shaking uncontrollably, and I gripped the edge of the table just to steady myself. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." He nodded slowly, eyes full of sorrow but strangely calm. "I didn't come for help, Dad. I came because I didn't want to leave without making things right. I came because I wanted Luke to know his grandfather before." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The rain outside turned into a storm, and I sat there staring at my son. The boy I'd thrown out, the man I'd prayed to see again, realizing that life had brought him home only to take him away again. And in that moment, the weight of 20 years came crashing down on me, and I knew that whatever time we had left, I'd spend every second trying to make up for the years I'd lost. The days after his confession felt like living in a dream I didn't want to wake from. And yet part of me prayed I would, because the truth was too heavy to carry. I'd sit across from him at the table, watching him talk, smile, drink coffee, pretending for a moment he wasn't sick, pretending that time hadn't stolen so much already. But then I'd catch the pale color of his skin, or the way his hands shook when he lifted his cup, and reality would hit me like a cold wind. I wanted to break down, to scream at God for giving me my son back only to threaten to take him away again, but I didn't. Instead, I made a promise to myself that whatever time we had left, I'd use it right. I'd be the father I wasn't before. I'd show him, in every way I could, that I never stopped loving him. The next morning I asked if I could meet Luke. He smiled, a soft, tired smile, and said, "He's been asking about you." The very next day they came together. I'll never forget that moment. The knock came again, lighter this time, and when I opened the door, there he was, my grandson, standing in a yellow raincoat, holding a toy truck in his little hands. He looked up at me with curious eyes that were so much like my son's at that age, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Hi," he said shyly. "Are you Grandpa?" My voice broke as I nodded. "Yeah," I whispered, "I guess I am." He smiled, the kind of smile that lights up a whole room, and before I knew it, he'd wrapped his tiny arms around my legs. That hug, God, that hug, melted 20 years of pain in an instant. My son stood behind him, watching quietly, his eyes glistening, and I could see something like peace there for the first time since he walked through my door. From that day forward, the house came alive again. Luke filled the rooms with laughter, with questions, with little footsteps running down the hall, and it felt like the walls themselves were breathing again. I cooked breakfast for them every morning, the way I used to when my boy was little. We'd sit at the table, 3 generations, eating pancakes while Luke told stories about his school and his friends. My son would laugh softly, sometimes coughing between bites, and I'd look at him, memorizing everything, the curve of his smile, the sound of his voice, because I knew time was running short. At night, when Luke was asleep, my son and I would sit on the porch with blankets over our knees, talking for hours about everything we'd missed. He told me about the places he'd been, the people he'd met, the life he built from nothing. I told him stories from when he was a boy, how he used to follow me to the shed, how he'd fall asleep in the truck after long drives. Sometimes we just sat in silence, watching the stars, letting the night speak for us. Every once in a while, he'd wince or rub his side, and I'd feel helpless, like I was watching time slip through my fingers. One night, he looked at me and said, "You know, Dad, I used to think forgiveness was something you had to earn, but maybe it's just something you give because you finally understand." I turned away so he wouldn't see the tears in my eyes. "You were always smarter than me," I muttered, and he chuckled softly. "Nah," he said, "just older now." We laughed, and for a few minutes, it felt like life had found its way back to us. I started taking care of him, in small ways, driving him to appointments, cooking his favorite meals, making sure he rested. Sometimes he'd fight me on it, saying he didn't want to be a burden, and I'd tell him, "You're my son. You could never be a burden." And every time I said it, I meant it with everything I had. Luke and I grew close fast. He'd follow me everywhere, ask me to fix his toys, tell me I was strong like his dad. I'd smile even when my heart broke a little at the thought that one day I might be all he had left. One evening, as I tucked Luke into bed, he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, Daddy says you used to be mad at him. Are you still mad?" I froze for a second, then smiled softly. "No, buddy," I said, brushing his hair back. "I was never mad, I was just lost. But your daddy helped me find my way again." He grinned sleepily, then whispered, "I'm glad you're here," before closing his eyes. I sat there in the dim light, listening to his steady breathing, and for the first time in decades, I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for my son. I asked for more time, just a little more time, because after all the years I'd wasted, I'd finally been given a second chance, and I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Those months were the most precious and painful days of my life. The doctors said the treatments might buy him some time, but we both knew what they really meant. You can't bargain with time, no matter how hard you pray. Still, we tried to make every day count. Every morning I'd wake up early, make breakfast, and listen for the soft sound of Luke's laughter echoing down the hallway. My son would shuffle in a little later, pale but smiling, pretending he felt stronger than he really did. We didn't talk much about the illness after that first week. We talked about life instead. The things we remembered, the things we still wanted to do, the things we never said when we should have. Sometimes he'd tell me about Mia, his voice soft, full of love and loss. He said she used to hum in the kitchen, the same way his mother used to when she was alive, and I realized life had a way of giving us small echoes of what we once lost. Other times, we just sat outside in the backyard, watching Luke chase fireflies, the evening light stretching across the grass like something holy. My son would lean back in his chair, a blanket draped over his legs, and say, This feels like home again." And I'd nod, too choked up to speak. I knew he was getting weaker, though he tried to hide it. His face thinned, his steps slowed, and sometimes I'd catch him holding his side, breathing shallow, pretending he was fine. I didn't push, I just stayed close. One afternoon, I found him sitting in his old room, the same one he'd left behind 20 years ago. The posters were faded, the furniture worn, but I'd kept everything as it was. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the old baseball glove I'd bought him when he was 10. "You kept it," he said softly, turning it over in his hands. "I never threw anything of yours away," I said. "Wes, I was hoping you'd come back for it someday." He smiled, tears filling his eyes. "You always did believe in me more than I believed in myself, didn't you?" I shook my head, feeling my throat tighten. "No, son. I just never stopped being your dad." He looked at me then, and for a long moment, we didn't need words. The air was thick with all the things we'd never said, but both understood. That night, we sat on the porch again, watching the stars. He was quiet for a long while, then said, "You know, Dad, I used to dream about coming home, but I never thought it'd be like this. I thought you'd still be mad." I laughed softly through the ache in my chest. "Mad? I was heartbroken, son. There's a difference." He nodded, staring at the night sky. "I'm glad you waited for me," he said. I looked at him and replied, "I wasn't waiting. I was surviving until you came back." He smiled then, the kind of smile that breaks you and heals you all at once. In the mornings, Luke would crawl into bed with his dad, and I'd stand in the doorway, watching them. Two parts of my heart I never thought I'd see together again. My son would tell him stories about his mom, about when he was little, about the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned. Luke would listen wide-eyed, soaking it all in. And I'd just watch, grateful and broken, knowing these were moments I'd replay for the rest of my days. One evening, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, my son looked at me and said, "Dade, I'm not scared anymore." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Why's that?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I know Luke's got you now, and because I finally got to come home." I couldn't hold it in anymore. I reached over, pulled him into my arms, and for the first time in decades, I held my boy the way I should have all those years ago. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He knew. The next morning, I found him asleep in that same chair on the porch, the sunrise painting his face in soft light. For a moment, I thought he was just resting. But when I touched his shoulder and felt the stillness there, I knew. The world went quiet again, like it had the night he left all those years ago. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, not angry, just full of peace. My son had come home. He'd found his way back. And though it broke me to lose him again, this time I knew he wasn't really gone. He'd left me something far greater than regret. He'd left me his son, his laughter, his second chance at love. The morning after he passed, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The air was still heavy, as if even the walls knew something sacred had left them. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the empty chair on the porch where he used to sit. I wanted to cry, but the tears just wouldn't come. Grief's a strange thing. It doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it comes quiet, sitting beside you like an old friend, reminding you of what you've lost with every breath you take. Luke came downstairs later, rubbing his sleepy eyes, asking, "Where's Dad?" I didn't know how to answer. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a whisper. "He's with your mom now, son." He didn't say anything, just crawled into my lap and buried his face in my chest. I held him tight, tighter than I ever held anyone in my life, and I promised myself I'd never let him feel the kind of emptiness I'd once created. The days that followed were slow and quiet. The funeral came and went, a few close friends, a pastor, a handful of old photographs that didn't seem enough to tell the story of a life so full and so fragile. When they lowered his casket into the ground, I placed that old baseball glove beside him. It felt right. That glove had been the start of so many of our memories, and now it would rest with him, a symbol of every word we never said but finally understood. When everyone else left, I stayed behind, sitting by his grave until the sun went down. I talked to him, just like I used to when I thought he could still hear me across the miles. I told him I was proud, that I was sorry, and that I'd take care of Luke the way I should have taken care of him. Then I went home, not to an empty house anymore, but to one that still echoed with his laughter and his little boy's footsteps. Luke started filling the spaces his father once occupied. His smile brought light into rooms that had been dark for decades. He'd ask me to tell him stories about his dad when he was little, and I'd tell him everything. The good, the bad, the stubborn moments, the silly ones too. And every time I spoke his father's name, I felt something healing inside me. Nights weren't so lonely anymore. We'd sit by the fire, Luke with his homework spread out, and me with my memories. Sometimes I'd catch him humming that same soft tune his dad used to hum, and I'd close my eyes and smile. Maybe grief never really goes away, but it changes shape. It turns from pain into presence, from loss into love. Some evenings, Luke and I would go to the porch, just like his dad and I used to. We'd watch the stars, and I'd tell him how his father loved the night sky. How he believed every star was a story waiting to be told. "Do you think Dad can see us?" Luke asked once, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, my throat tight, and said, "I think he never stopped." From that day on, we made it a ritual. Every night before bed, we'd go outside, pick one bright star, and say goodnight to him. Life began to move forward again, slow but steady. I grew older, weaker maybe, but not lonely, not anymore. Because every time Luke laughed, I heard my son. Every time he called me Grandpa. It felt like the universe giving me one last chance to love better, to be better. I realized then that forgiveness isn't something you give once, something you live. My son's return, his secret, his courage, it changed everything I thought I knew about being a father. I couldn't change the past, but I could honor it. And so I did, every single day, through the boy who carried his father's smile and his mother's heart. The years passed gently after that, like a slow sunset stretching across the horizon. Luke grew taller, stronger, and kinder than anyone I'd ever known. He had his father's smile, his mother's calm, and a quiet wisdom that seemed far too deep for his age. Watching him grow was like watching life give me a second chance, one I never thought I'd be blessed with. I taught him how to fix old things, the leaky faucet, the porch steps, the way his dad once learned beside me. But this time, I didn't just teach him how to do it right. I taught him why it mattered, to care, to take his time, to see the worth in small things. Sometimes we'd drive out to the lake, the same one where his dad learned to skip stones. He'd sit beside me, listening as I told stories about his father. The stubborn boy who once thought he knew everything, and the man who came back to teach his old man how to love again. Luke would laugh, shake his head, and say, "I wish I could have known him longer." I'd smile softly and say, "You do, son. He's right here," tapping his chest. When Luke turned 16, he found an old box in the attic with photos, letters, and a faded guitar his father once played. He brought it down to me and said, "Grandpa, I want to learn." So we sat on the porch as he plucked the strings, awkward at first, but determined. The sound was rough, but it was music, real, living, beautiful. And as I listened, I swear I heard my son's laughter carried in every note. Time rolled on, as it always does. Luke graduated high school, then college, and every step he took felt like a piece of his father walking beside him. He told me he wanted to work with kids, to help those who'd lost their parents, to make sure no one ever had to feel alone. That's when I knew my boy's legacy wasn't gone. It had just changed hands. Through Luke, my son's heart kept beating. Sometimes, when the house grew quiet again and I sat on the porch alone, I'd look up at the stars and whisper, "You did good, son. Real good." And somehow, the wind would stir just enough to let me know he heard. I got older, my hands weaker, my steps slower, but my heart somehow felt lighter. Love has a way of softening even the hardest years. Luke would come by every weekend, fix things I used to handle myself, then sit with me for hours just talking. I'd listen to his plans, his hopes, the world he wanted to build, and every word made me prouder than I ever thought possible. One evening, he handed me a photo, him standing beside a small house, freshly painted, a little boy in his arms. "I named him Daniel," he said quietly. My heart stopped for a moment. "After your dad?" I asked. He nodded. He deserved to be remembered. That night when they left, I sat alone with that photo and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. My son may have been gone 20 years before he came back, but what he left behind would last generations. His forgiveness saved me, his love lived through Luke, and his memory gave me peace. I realized as the years folded behind me, that life isn't about how long you get to love someone. It's about how deeply you let them change you while you can. And my boy, he changed me forever. The years caught up with me quietly, like a soft tide creeping over sand. One day you're working on the porch. The next you're sitting there just watching the world go by, grateful for the stillness. My hair turned white. My hands shook too much to fix the little things, but my heart, somehow, felt steadier than it ever had. Luke visited often, always bringing that same light his father once carried. Sometimes his little boy Daniel would run through the house laughing, the sound echoing off the old wooden floors like music. I'd sit there, watching him play, and it felt like time had folded in on itself, like I was seeing my son all over again, small and full of life. There were nights when I'd wake up and think I heard Daniel's voice calling me. But it was just the wind against the window, whispering like an old friend. I didn't fear those nights anymore. I'd just smile and whisper back, "I'm still here." My body was failing me, I could feel it. The doctor said I didn't have long, but that didn't scare me either. I'd already been given more than I ever deserved, a chance to love again, to heal, to be forgiven. One evening, Luke came over after work, and we sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was a grown man now, strong and steady, his boy playing at his feet. He looked at me and said, "Grandpa, I think about Dad a lot. Do you ever miss him?" I smiled softly, my eyes tracing the fading light. "Every day, son," I said. "But missing him doesn't hurt like it used to. It just reminds me how much I loved him." We sat in silence after that, just listening to the crickets, feeling the evening wrap around us. When they left that night, Luke hugged me tight, longer than usual. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "For what?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "For giving my dad a home again." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my heart full and breaking all at once. That night I went to bed early. I took one last look around the house. The pictures on the walls, the baseball glove on the mantel, the porch chair where my son and I had watched the stars, and I felt peace. Real, deep peace. I lay down, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years I wasn't old or tired or alone. I was just a father, waiting to see his boy again. And in that quiet moment, I could almost hear his voice calling from somewhere beyond the dark, warm and clear as the day he left. "Hey, Dad, I'm home." A tear slipped down my cheek as everything faded into light. The next morning they found me still smiling, a gentle peace on my face, the sunrise touching my hands. They said it looked like I'd gone in my sleep, but I know better. I didn't go anywhere. I finally went home.